Hello, everybody. This is Nick Matthews. I'm a solutions architect with AWS. You're here with us for Cisco on AWS Networking, where we're talking about SD-WAN. We've also got Paul Kohler, who's a global alliance lead for Cisco. So just a few housekeeping notes here. So on the right, you've got a couple options for changing your setup here. If you're on the audio, you can switch into phone or voice mode in case there's any sort of audio issues. There's also a Q&A panel there, so please ask some questions. We'll be answering those both as the webinar is going on, as well as at the end. We'll leave a little bit of time for some Q&A, so help us keep it a little bit more active. And then the most common questions always like, hey, can I get this recording? Can I get this deck? And the answer is yes. This gets sent out a few days after the webinar ends, and the recordings generally go on YouTube as well. So with that said, let's get started. So, we're here to talk about networking and cloud in general, and the idea of this is that essentially to a certain extent, and I've seen this a lot of enterprise and customers that I work with, the ability for an enterprise to effectively use the cloud is sometimes limited by how well they actually can use the networking, because the networking is sort of a core mandatory component of almost any application on the internet these days. And so, there's a couple of components that the cloud is good at, like things like scalability. So making sure your network is also scalable with your computing resources. Security, I think more and more networking is also tightly integrated with security. And so how do you implement networking policies and routing and that kind of stuff to make sure that you're one, available, but two, also secure. As of yesterday, we now have 19 regions across the world. And so if you want to go global in minutes, that's particularly interesting for, as we talk about SD-WAN and networking in general, how can you make your SD-WAN or your network and your computing reach global, maybe even in minutes, as well as the cost effectiveness and making sure that you're using the resources the right way and those kinds of things. And so we think these are both core components of cloud computing as well as networking. In terms of the services that we have on the networking side of things, we've got Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC. That's your ability to sort of create a segmented data center in the cloud of sorts that just has your resources, and you may have multiple VPCs per account, or you may have a VPC per application, and so we provide you that flexibility. We also have AWS Direct Connect. So Direct Connect is the ability essentially for you to bring your private connectivity into our backbone. So if you want to rent a port on our backbone of sorts, you can bring your connectivity in. You can connect to us privately via your MPLS carrier, or private circuit, or cross-connect at one of the shared co-locations that we have. We've also got our elastic load balancing products so that we can have highly scalable load balancers to make sure we can handle inbound load balancing that requires for customers, as well as Route 53 to handle DNS and things like global DNS and failover and those kinds of things. So if you want to extend your SD-WAN, particularly if you already have that for your branch and data center establishment, you can bring that into AWS. You probably want to do that for a couple of reasons. One is to have sort of a similar edge point to the edge of your cloud, which probably resembles your data center, and to make sure that you're getting the most out of that investment on the SD-WAN side of things. And so SD-WAN generally brings a number of features in terms of cost effectiveness on your WAN, as well as some different application and security controls, and bring that to AWS and making that all part of your entire WAN strategy is important for a lot of customers I talk to. If you take a look at sort of make an architectural diagram to make this a little bit more real, this is what it might look like, right? So on the left and right, we've got two different regions. So in this case, we're running in Northern Virginia and in Frankfurt, Germany. So we've got a couple different VPCs or more running applications. Maybe these are developers or maybe IT applications. Down at the bottom, we've got a couple sites. They're using site-to-site mesh through the SD-WAN networking. They've maybe a data center on the right. And so the VPN mesh that works with SD-WAN can bring that functionality directly into AWS. And so you've now got SD-WAN running inside AWS and acting as a sort of virtual edge. And whether you want to treat your data centers or whether you want to treat your VPCs as data centers or branches, it's sort of up to you. So a couple of use cases is just the scalability. So how do you scale the amount of VPCs and the amount of sites that you have on AWS, as well as if you have a lot of branch sites? Scalability tends to be a concern. Security, like I said, security is always priority one for us, and it's a security concern for customers as well. So anything you can do to increase security is generally a good thing. The global footprint as well as the cost effectiveness. So SD-WAN really just those same things that we brought up earlier makes all those things better. if we take a look at what you can actually do with SD-WAN on AWS, you can do things like, cross-region, cross-AZ connectivity. You can automate network configuration and use encryption for higher security. You can do things like route-specific SaaS applications and customized service applications through the SD-WAN, as well as if you want to provide maybe more granular access to certain branches or certain data centers to certain VPCs. So maybe your outsourced development group from India should only access these 3 VPCs, but your branch offices should be able to get to these IT applications or something like that. So making that more secure and more granular is a strong thing. So, I mean, if you want to build one on AWS, there's a couple ways you can do this. The easiest way is to go into Marketplace and find, maybe you've got a preferred SD-WAN vendor that you're looking at, or maybe you're doing sort of a proof of concept trial. You can go try a couple of them. You can go out there, rent it for a couple hours if you want, pay per the hour. This should set you back, not very much money to, try out and see how it works on AWS, see how it integrates with the rest of your network. And if it does work, you can scale that across the world. Like I said, we've got 19 regions now, so it's pretty easy to do that. So that's a sort of exciting aspect of SD-WAN on AWS. So with our networking, we've got essentially what we're really talking about today is really combining the cloud with the networking with SD-WAN. We like to say the cloud's the new normal. Here's our 19 regions. This slide's already out of date. I hate these slides sometimes because they change so fast. And so the VPC is the virtual network in the cloud that we talked through. If you want to see what a normal network looks like, you might have 2 data centers and whatnot. If we combine this in with what a VPC looks like, it looks very similar. So it has applications and peering instead of fiber. It's got direct connect instead of a WAN, etc. We have our virtual private gateway, which is our VPN offering. We have internet gateways for internet connectivity, and then our direct connect. If you have 2 separate VPCs, you connect that across the world now with VPC peering. So that's an interesting feature. And then if you want to connect to AWS, there's a couple different options. So you can use the internet to connect to your VPCs. You can use VPN. So you can use your AWS's managed VPN, or you can use your own hosted SD-WAN. Or you can connect your backbone to our backbone with Direct Connect. So there's a number of different ways you can do that. We like to provide customers options sort of equally across those. So if you take a look at our Direct Connect locations, this is the United States, gives you an idea of where some of our locations are at. The way you actually connect to our Direct Connect locations is you figure out which of those locations you want to go to. You run a fiber to that location, and then you have a couple different ways to do that. Either you run the fiber directly yourself, you find a partner to run the fiber for you, or you may have a partner you're already connected to, and they will connect to our Direct Connect location. And then, so one example of this is, let's just say you choose the Dallas location. I think there's someone typing, if you wouldn't mind going on mute. So if you go to the Direct Connect location in Dallas, then you can actually connect to any of our regions across the world through Direct Connect. So that's through the AWS Direct Connect gateway. If you want to come in over VPN or through SD-WAN, what we'd probably do is look at something like this. I see a lot of customers start off with maybe a handful of VPCs, and then maybe they want to go to another region, so they connect those together, and then maybe the cloud group starts getting AWS access, and before you know it, you have just tons and tons of VPCs. It's an awesome problem to have. It's sort of fun to solve from a networking problem. The use case we typically see here is transit VPC. So use VPN to connect your VPCs. You can centralize connectivity in the middle here with firewalls, VPNs, and routers. Those are highly available across different availability zones, and we use things like BGP to do high availability to make sure that none of this stuff goes down. And so we can scale this out pretty good, and it's a lot of fun to work with. There's a couple things you want to know about from performance. So we recommend using security groups. That is your firewall in the cloud. Each spoke tunnel can do 1.25 gigabits per second of throughput. The transit VPC by default will typically advertise all the spoke routes to each other. We have a limit of 100 routes inside a single route table. And then the instances themselves can forward about 1.1 to 3 gigabits, depending on packet size and instance type and that kind of thing. And so if you're building a transit VPC, you sort of may want to think about architecting your connectivity into AWS through this, whether it's SD-WAN or through other sort of products. So one of the things you can do to reduce bandwidth is use peering between VPCs that may be sending a lot of traffic to each other for east-west traffic. So the transit VPC makes it easy to centralize that connectivity. You can do regional deployments that use our backbone, because any traffic that goes across the backbone on AWS goes over our fiber that we own and operate. And if you use cross-region peering, that's actually encrypted. Otherwise, you can do your own IPsec tunnels. But it's a good central monitoring, and sort of feels a bit like a DMZ for some customers, which makes them feel comfortable. So we've launched some cool features. So we talked a little bit about cross-region peering and inter-region peering. Direct Connect Gateway allows you to connect multiple VPCs, even across multiple regions together, to one Direct Connect port. Other things like if you have a public address range that you want to bring to AWS because you've given that out to customers or because it's good for your reputation, you can actually bring your own IP address range to AWS, and we'll give that back to you as elastic IP addresses. And Private Link is a feature that provides private access across multiple VPCs for a service. So it's like endpoint as a service almost. And Resize VPC allows you to add additional CIDR ranges to an existing VPC. So that helps you scale out your deployment. If you talk about SD-WAN on AWS specifically, you can say, like, is your VPC, is that a data center or a branch office? Like, how do I put this into terms with my on-premises sort of environment? So we go back to our same, couple of VPC sort of environment here. If this is a data center, it very much could act like it, right? Because there might be hundreds of branches that connect to these couple of VPCs. There might be some very high-speed connections, like 10 gig direct connects coming into these VPCs. And then you might be hosting hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of applications in these VPCs, which these make it feel very much like a data center in terms of SD-WAN connectivity. Alternatively, these VPCs might act like a branch. So you might have hundreds or thousands of these VPCs, which then, that sort of looks a lot more like a branch at that point. So you have to worry about how you connect all your branches together, how you segment those, all that sort of stuff. From a branch perspective, you also have multiple egress options. Do I want to go VPN over the internet, or just SSL over the internet, or come over the Direct Connect Gateway? So leaving for the VPC has a couple different options, and they have different qualities of that experience. And then you may have a VPC per application, and so they might be very small. And so the good part is, no matter how you sort of slice it or look at it, the same concept source still applies, and you can choose how you want to do that. And SD-WAN sort of treats both data centers and branches equally. And so depending on which use case is right for you and your deployment, SD-WAN actually brings some interesting help there. So if we take a look at best practice of SD-WAN on AWS, there's a couple things you want to look for. Like I highly recommend looking at the C5, M5 instance types, because they provide more performance at a cheaper price typically, as well as they've got some networking benefits above the older instance types. Inside our networking and inside our VPCs, we do specific functionality. We basically run an overlay network that we developed, and so that means that we don't run any layer 2 networking. So a lot of the multicast and broadcast functionality isn't there. So from a high availability perspective, you want to make sure the provider you choose has strong integrations in AWS. And so we'll talk a little bit about that later on this webinar, as well as integration for native services and better performance of those kinds of things. You also want, if you can get it, horizontal scalability, because we don't want to have to choose the right size box for the next 5 years. It's not a piece of hardware. We'd rather say, like, hey, can I have 5 of these or 10 of these or however many I need, and make sure that we can just increase that number. And if you have dozens or hundreds of VPCs, you probably want to centralize that connectivity. And as always, security is job zero. Like, you never want to skimp on security. So don't let automation or cloud or any of those kinds of things be excuses to sort of skimp on that. We certainly don't. We strongly believe that customers can be more secure in the cloud than they can on premises due to the automation and scale and the way that we operate. And so SD-WAN should be a part of that. So if you're curious about more about SD-WAN, we actually paid for this Analyst study last year, which goes through and shows some of the use cases and the way that different SD-WAN vendors work on AWS. And so this tiny.cc/AWS-SD-WAN, you can go check that out and take a look. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Paul, who's going to talk more about the Cisco SD-WAN solution on AWS. And we've been working together for a while, so I'm pretty excited for this.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Nick. Appreciate it. Yeah, so like Nick said, I'm going to go through the Cisco SD-WAN solution, and then also the various different integrations and offerings we have in relation to AWS. Okay, so why SD-WAN and why Cisco? There's been a lot of hype about SD-WAN, and it's an increasing conversation in the networking and IT industry. So SD-WAN really is becoming the backbone of the enterprise, and here are a couple data points. So here from Network World in August, they had a article, and this is a quote from it. IDC found that as enterprise customers add SaaS and IaaS services, they will increasingly look to SD-WAN as a way of intelligently automating how application traffic is delivered to the branch sites. And then in a Del Oro report in September, they said Cisco is in a strong position to succeed in the SD-WAN market. Cisco already has the largest access router install base with over 75% revenue share for every year since 2000. And then most recently, Gartner released their Magic Quadrant for WAN Edge, and WAN Edge encompasses SD-WAN. And predictably, we're in the leaders quadrant in the top right. And so what we're going to do here is kind of deep dive a little bit more into SD-WAN and the solution, and like I said, the integration points with AWS. So one of the things that's really driving this, or the primary thing that's driving this, is the changing needs and the changing opportunities within the industry, and then SD-WAN being able to address those needs. And so the traditional model for customers was that they would send their branch traffic via MPLS back to their own enterprise data center, and then which then would send it out to the internet. So a sort of trombone architecture. Now, increasingly, if you look at the bottom part of the slide, what customers are now doing is they're weaving in internet, and so they're greatly sort of migrating a lot of the WAN transport from MPLS to internet. And then furthermore, from the branch, they're just increasingly, they're going direct to the internet, or DIA. And that's, in large part because of internet, but also because increasingly their applications and their workloads reside in the cloud rather than on-premise. And so when we look at these different themes that we're seeing transform the networking industry, on the right-hand side, as I mentioned, they're going from the trombone architecture to DIA, and then the customers want WAN transport independence, whereas previously each WAN transport would be treated differently, and the encryption and security would be managed differently. They basically want to be blocked from that complexity, and they want to be able to aggregate all the various different transports out there, which means hybrid WAN. Hybrid WAN is where you combine MPLS and 4G LTE internet. Also, another thing that has been very time-consuming for enterprise customers has been security certificate administration at scale, and that's something that SD-WAN sort of handles for them and does under the covers, so that they don't have to get involved in that nearly as much. They're also looking for that single pane of glass, and because these workloads are moving to the cloud via IaaS and SaaS, they need solutions that address that. Also, the security, so firewall services increasingly are moving to the cloud. So an example of that is Umbrella, and we partner also with many other third-party solutions in that space. And then finally, they're looking for VPN segmentation that extends not just on-site, but all the way through to the cloud. And so, knowing that these are the demands and these are the changing needs of enterprise customers, the solution really does need to address these things. And so, Cisco SD-WAN is a solution that really sort of, from the ground up, from day zero, Viptela, the startup, really had those themes and the knowledge of how the industry was changing in mind. And so the solution has been architected as such. And here's, if you break down the solution and the basics, it's really comprises a number of key components. And traditionally, routers themselves would have both, would combine the data plane and the control plane, the data plane being responsible for the packet forwarding, the different physical interfaces and the ASICs, and then the control plane being the responsible for the actual configuration, maintenance of the routing table, passing down policies and provisioning. And what's happened is the traditional model where you had the control plane and the data plane in each individual router was very complex, because when a customer who had like hundreds or thousands of sites needed to make a migration change in their architecture, what they needed to do was make a change on one individual router, then understand how that had a ripple effect to the other routers, sequentially go to each individual router and look at only the viewpoint of the network from that individual router and make the changes sequentially in a manual way. And it was exceedingly time consuming, and it required a lot of planning. And so with SD-WAN and software-defined networking, fundamentally what we've done is we've abstracted the control plane and pushed it into the cloud. And so it's unified. And so those components at the top of the diagram, the vManage and the vSmart, they represent that control plane. And on the bottom end of the diagram, those are the actual physical routers. And that's their responsibility is data plane, or just physically forwarding the packets. Now, with Cisco SD-WAN, what we've done with those routers is that initially from Viptela, we just had vEdge routers, and then the virtual appliance version was called vEdge Cloud. But now, most recently, in the past few months, we also now support ISR, CSR, ASR, ENCS. And so you have like all of the main core Cisco routing platforms supported. Now, moving up, we have the data plane in the bottom part of the, part of the diagram. And then vManage, that element's responsibility is the UI. So that's what customers actually connect to see vManage and the actual configuration. And it represents basically a single pane of glass. It's also the point where it's the primary point for the API interaction. So REST APIs, retrieving data for third-party network management applications, and also provides vAnalytics. And then finally, the control plane is vSmart. And we always have more than one controller for redundancy and high availability reasons. And that's where the core, the routing tables reside, and the policies are passed down to the individual routers. So, when we talk about Cisco SD-WAN, just to kind of clear up some points that are oftentimes confusing for customers, and we do get frequent questions about them. Now, Viptela was the startup and helped start this SD-WAN trend. And then Cisco purchased or acquired Viptela and then rebranded that solution as Cisco SD-WAN. And so Cisco SD-WAN is really synonymous with the Viptela solution, and that Viptela code has now been migrated to the Polaris iOS XE operating system, and that's why it's now available on ISRs, ASRs, CSRs, and ENCS. Also, Viptela from day one, the solution was developed with the enterprise customer in mind. And so what you now see, if we kind of take a step back and we look at the various different SD-WAN solutions out there, basically they are in a few main buckets. One is WAN optimization. So a huge number of, or a large number of the solutions out there are actually WAN optimization products. And now, because SD-WAN is taking hold and really popular, they're trying to migrate that solution to address SD-WAN. Another is SD-WAN startups, but they started with a commercial SMB customer in mind. And so that's the solution that they built. And a lot of the times, typically, it's a cloud-based solution. And so now they're trying to retroactively add these enterprise features and functionality to address that market. And so really Cisco SD-WAN does actually stand apart and is uniquely different that way. From day one, it was an enterprise product. I talked about the routers that we support, and this is, as of the past few months. And this month, we're adding the CSR. Right now, at the end of the month, we'll support the CSR, and that's very important. So positioning is another one. Cisco has IWAN, the Cisco SD-WAN or Viptela, and Meraki. And so in this blog post, Senior Vice President Scott Harrell made it very clear that IWAN we're going to continue supporting. However, really it's in sustaining mode. And so, we're not adding the new features and functionality to that solution, and we're encouraging customers to migrate. And Cisco SD-WAN is the enterprise solution. We also have Meraki. Meraki is more positioned for the commercial SMB sector. And Meraki also has a couple other use cases it's focused on. One is Unified Threat Management, or UTM, and the other being wireless. And then finally, Cloud OnRamp. So we're going to talk a lot in this presentation about OnRamp for IaaS, but we also have OnRamp for SaaS, and that's another feature that we have within SD-WAN. And that was previously named as Cloud Express. And I just wanted to point that out because sometimes customers get a little confused between the few. So there are different AWS use cases, a number of different ways in which we interface and partner with AWS technically. So one is that we have virtual appliances which are certified and listed on AWS Marketplace. We have VH Cloud. We also have CSR. I'll be showing in the following slide, some more details on that. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit. We also have SD-WAN Cloud OnRamp for IaaS. And so this is where you actually automatically provision the VH Cloud or the CSR within the AWS Cloud. And then also it allows you to take those resources, VPC resources, and then optionally map them to existing network VPN segments. Also, you can host your controller components like vManage and vSmart in the AWS cloud. At the beginning of Viptela's founding, by default, we hosted those control components in AWS. And so the bulk or the majority of our customers have those controller components hosted in the AWS cloud. So we also happen to be a huge AWS customer. And it's another way that the partnership is very close. And so, we've optimized the provisioning and the orchestration of those components, bringing them up within the AWS environment in a very smooth and quick way. And so that relationship is key. And then finally, this is an indirect benefit, but a very important and critical benefit. And this is just simply that SD-WAN enables, enterprise branch connectivity to the cloud and to AWS. So it's absolutely critical for, performance, delivering performance and reliability to the cloud. It also helps the enterprise to be that much more nimble and quick in its network migrations and architecture. And so it really does, it's a big enabler. SD-WAN in general, but especially Cisco SD-WAN is a big enabler of the cloud and helping enterprises consume AWS workloads and services. All right, so AWS Marketplace Listings, this is what we have currently. So we have for the VH Cloud, we have we're listed on the primary marketplace as well as the China marketplace. We also have the CSR, is a few different appliances are listed. Some of them bring your own license, and then we also have pay-as-you-go. Now that we're adding the SD-WAN support for CSR, we're going to be listing that on AWS this month. And also we're working on, at the moment, on pay-as-you-go options as well as a government listing. So those things are in progress, and stay tuned because they'll be imminent in the next few months. All right, so now I'm going to talk about Cloud OnRamp for IS and kind of give you some more details on that. So as I mentioned, this is basically the automated provisioning of the virtual appliances within AWS. And so you have your vManage, which is that UI that I mentioned that gives you the visibility to your existing routers sitting at your branch or data center, for example. And then what the customer does is they provide their account subscription details, they type them in on the vManage UI and bring up the virtual appliances within the AWS cloud. That can be a vEdge cloud or a CSR. We always have two for redundancy purposes. And then you get the visibility to the actual workloads, so the AWS workloads. And they're reachable, and then also you can map to them. So for example, if we have VPN segments, like let's say, for example, a VPN segment for HR, human resources, and then another one for finances, you can extend the security to ensure that certain workloads or applications and data is only available to HR, and other information is only available to finance, for example. Another thing to note is host VPCs in one cloud account can be mapped to transit VPCs in another. That question comes up every so often. Yeah, that kind of covers it in a nutshell. So as I mentioned, we have a pair of routers are instantiated in the gateway VPC. And this use case we kind of term as gateway VPC or transit VPC. And then the IPsec tunnels are established. BGP is established for route advertisement, and then the AWS resources are mapped to the existing VPN segments, and the entire workflow process is automated. So from a high level, here are some screen captures, and you can see that on the right-hand side of the screen, you kind of have the wizard there, and where it highlights in color, and then a green check mark appears, you've completed that portion of the process of the workflow. So you bring up those host VPCs, and then the gateway VPC is brought up, or transit VPC is brought up, and the full connectivity is available. And then finally, you kind of have the high-level view here. So yeah, so I just want to conclude here, and just go through some of the events that we have currently. We have a lot going on. So we have, in a couple weeks' time, we'll be at reInvent Las Vegas. So we have a booth and customer presentation. We also have a webinar. This is going to be, it's Cisco Future WAN for Asia Pacific and Japan and China. So that'll be December 5th or 6th. So if you're in that theater, you may get an invite for that. Also, we'll be appearing at AWS Summit, so one in Singapore and one in Sydney. We also have imminent collateral, which I think may be already live. So we have a joint how-to guide, a joint solution guide. We also have a case study with Verizon. So we're both partners with Verizon. And then also we have a couple imminent web pages. And we also have other things in the works too, other collaborations, some of which will be mentioned at reInvent. We have a joint customer, Koch Industries, who will be presenting at reInvent and talking about their SD-WAN an AWS implementation and integration, and so that's also going to be great. But overall, we have a very close partnership, and we're doing a lot. We have a lot of things in progress, and we have a lot jointly to offer our enterprise customers. So I think now we're going to the Q&A. I don't know, Nick, if we have any questions you want to mention or bring up.
Sure. Yeah. So there was one question that essentially, Cisco's got a number of sort of SD-WAN sort of products and strategies, and so maybe you can sort of just talk a little bit about how the Cisco SD-WAN solution fits in, and maybe how it compares or whatnot, because there was a couple questions about that.
Okay. Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, so within Cisco, the Cisco SD-WAN solution is based on Viptela, and it is targeted at the enterprise. So how we compare ourselves to the other competitors, like I mentioned, is that the other competitors belong in a couple buckets. One is WAN optimization, and they are adding features and functionality, but basically they're just not quite there in terms of enterprise, having a full-fledged enterprise scalable solution. And then also the other SD-WAN pure play startups, they really had solutions that were targeted at commercial SMB, and they're adding those features and functionality for the enterprise. But the bottom line is that we know that when we get into a proof of concept, while when it comes to slide decks, the competitors are very strong. Once we get into a proof of concept with the enterprise, we nearly always win. And so we're very, very confident the moment that we get to a proof of concept, because the proof is in the pudding, and it'll become clear that we're able to address these typical enterprise needs. And in particular on moving traffic to AWS cloud and workloads.
Sure. There were also a couple of questions about the credentials you guys use to actually manage customer accounts. So one of the questions was, do you need separate credentials for tunnel creation to basically the VPN gateway for each account, which I know on the AWS side, we actually generate pre-shared keys for each one of our VPN tunnels, so that gets done automatically, although you would need the Identity and Access Manager, IAM credentials to create the VPN, but you wouldn't necessarily need one for each VPC. But there was the one question about if you guys support like federated access or cross-account roles or those kinds of things, or is it just access keys?
Yeah, so we do support pre-shared keys, and we have our own engine and author available, and the keys are automatically handled and regenerated and refreshed periodically. It's configurable, but it's fairly often, and so that's all taken care of. However, if the customer chooses to, they have the option to use another key author, and they can configure that. So that's an option too. The pre-shared keys and the IPsec tunnels are automatically brought up with the OnRamp option. However, we also support manual standards-based IPsec, and so the customer optionally can manually configure that to a third party or to AWS if that's their preference also.
There's a question here that says, hey, I've seen that the Cisco SD-WAN features are also have something to do with security. Will the vEdge router support that, or is it only targeted for ISR and ASR platform routers?
Yeah, so so we just had actually an announcement yesterday, and a lot of press coverage on SD-WAN, and a big part of that is what we call Great Wall, and so we are adding additional security functionality to the product, and the answer is yes. It is supported on vEdge as well as ISR and CSR. But I mean, fundamentally, at a big picture level, the answer is yes. However, I think there may be some nuanced detail there, so it's worthwhile checking with your SE. I don't know off the top of my head on, there may be a couple corner cases or exceptions to the rule. So I would suggest you just double click and check with the SE.
Okay. So there was one question about how you automate the tunnel creation from the new VPCs to the transit VPC on the vEdge.
Yeah, so we use basically a cloud init file is the way that we pass the configuration parameters. The customer doesn't have to really get involved in that. It is automated for them, and so unless they need to customize it, or there's some kind of corner case that we need to account for, we kind of handle it ourselves. And like I mentioned, we use the cloud init file to pass the configuration parameters back and forth.
Okay, let's see here. What's the difference between the SD-WAN vEdge cloud router and the cloud services router, the CSR?
Yeah, so good question. So the CSR, has been that traditional virtual appliance product that Cisco has, and they have some, additional bells and whistles. So especially throughput, higher throughput, some high availability features that aren't available in the vEdge cloud. The vEdge cloud was basically the virtualized version of vEdge, and so the code base was identical, but we didn't add those additional bells and whistles I mentioned that are available in the CSR. Now going forward, we'll support both, but we're trying to converge the two because we want to support one single code base and one singular platform. But for right now, we support both. And like I say, the CSR has a few more features that the vEdge cloud doesn't. And to add one more point there, in regards to AWS, for example, we have with the CSR, we already offer pay-as-you-go. And with the Cisco SD-WAN supported CSR, we will also be rolling out making pay-as-you-go available with the CSR. However, we won't make pay-as-you-go available for vEdge Cloud.
Okay. There was a clarification question about cross-account roles specifically. Is it just cross-account roles get support, or is it just the static access keys for credentials?
We do support cross-account roles, so you can enter multiple accounts on OnRamp, and you can access, multiple AWS accounts if that's desired. I'm not sure if I answered the question fully,
okay.
Nick. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, one other thing, by the way, is as you're, submitting these written questions, we will respond to every single one. So just because, either we didn't verbally answer them right now, or if I gave a partial answer or I need to check, we'll come back with a complete answer. So please submit them.
All right, cool. Well, those are the questions it looks like we've got that came in. So I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, but I'd like to thank everyone for their time.
Yeah, no, I'd like to echo what you just said. Thank you. Also, Nick, and thanks to AWS. It's a fantastic partnership, and we have a lot to offer currently, and then also a lot in progress. We'll be at reInvent, and for those of you who are going to reInvent, please stop by our booth and say hi, and we can, we have a lot to show.
Cool deal. All right, thanks everybody.
All right, thank you.